It was just another regular day for Emily, or so everyone thought. The sun was warm on her skin as she stepped onto the sidewalk, her cane tapping gently in front of her. The city was alive with sounds: cars honking, people chatting, footsteps rushing by. To most, this was just a normal morning, but for Emily, every step was a challenge. Every movement required careful listening, every decision guided by instinct and trust. She wasn't alone. Walking beside her, steady and calm, was Shadow, her guide dog. Shadow was a large German shepherd, his fur sleek and his ears always alert. He moved smoothly, leading her safely through the crowd. Most people saw just a blind woman and her dog. They didn't look twice. They didn't think about her life, her struggles, or her strength. But if they knew who she really was, they wouldn't dare mess with her. Emily had learned long ago that people often judged what they didn't understand. Some were kind, offering to help her cross the street or holding doors open. Others, though, were cruel. They whispered when she passed. Some even laughed, thinking she couldn't hear them. But she could. She always could. She had gotten used to it. The rude comments, the dismissive looks, the way some people spoke to her like she was a child. "Poor thing," they would say, shaking their heads. As if she was helpless. As if she couldn't take care of herself. She didn't let it bother her. Not anymore. But today would be different. As Emily walked along the familiar path to her favorite cafe, she felt Shadow slow down slightly. His body tensed, just for a second, before he continued forward. Most people wouldn't notice such a small change, but Emily knew Shadow better than she knew herself. Something was off. And then she heard them. A group of men, their voices loud, their laughter sharp. She couldn't see them, but she could hear the way they moved, the scrape of boots against the pavement, the jingle of chains, the way their words slurred together like they had been drinking too early in the day. Bikers. She had no problem with bikers in general. Many were good people. But these men? She could tell by the way they spoke, by the way their voices carried, that they weren't the good kind. One of them whistled. "Hey there, sweetheart," a voice called. Emily ignored it. She had learned long ago that responding never helped. But another voice spoke up. "Ah, what's wrong? Too good to talk to us?" The laughter that followed made her stomach tighten. Shadow moved closer to her side, his head slightly turned toward the voices. His ears flicked forward, waiting. He was calm, but alert. He was always alert. Emily kept walking. She wasn't scared. Not yet. But the footsteps behind her made it clear they weren't done with her. "Hey, lady, you blind or something?" More laughter. She kept her pace steady. She knew where she was. Just a few more blocks to the cafe. She had been coming here for years. The owner knew her. If she could just get there, she'd be fine. But then, a rough hand suddenly grabbed her arm. Emily stopped, her body going stiff. "Hey, we're talking to you," the man said, his grip firm. She could smell the alcohol on his breath, feel the heat of his body too close to hers. She didn't panic. Panic was useless. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, listening. 3, maybe 4 of them. They were big, judging by their footsteps. Heavy boots. Leather jackets. Probably strong. But not as strong as Shadow. The second the man tightened his grip, a deep, rumbling growl filled the air. It wasn't just any growl. It was low, steady, and full of warning. A sound that froze people in their tracks. Shadow stepped forward, his body rigid. His teeth bared. His tail raised. The man hesitated. "Whoa, easy there, Mutt." Emily smiled. Not because she was amused, but because she knew what was coming next. "You should probably let go now," she said, her voice calm. The man scoffed. "Or what?" Shadow lunged. It happened so fast. One moment, the man was laughing. The next, he was on the ground, gasping for breath. Shadow had knocked him flat on his back, his large paws pinning him down. His teeth were inches from the man's throat. The other bikers stepped back, their bravado disappearing in an instant. "Call your dog off," one of them shouted. Emily took a slow breath, tilting her head slightly as if considering it. "You see, here's the thing," she said. "Shadow isn't just any dog." The man beneath Shadow whimpered. "All right? All right? I'm sorry." Shadow didn't move. Not until Emily gave the command. "Release." Instantly, Shadow stepped back, returning to her side as if nothing had happened. His ears were still alert, his eyes locked on the men. He was ready. Always ready. The bikers helped their friend up, muttering curses under their breath. But they didn't try anything else. They didn't even look at her as they hurried away, vanishing into the city crowd. Emily exhaled. She reached down, running her fingers through Shadow's fur. "Good boy." His tail wagged slightly, but he stayed focused, his head still high, scanning the area. People around them whispered. Some had seen what happened. Some hadn't. It didn't matter. Emily adjusted her bag and continued walking, as if nothing had happened at all. She didn't need to see to know that those men would never forget this day. And if anyone else ever thought about messing with her, well, they'd soon learn the same lesson. Emily walked forward, her cane tapping lightly on the sidewalk. The sun was still warm, the city still busy, but something had changed. She could feel the whispers around her. People had seen what happened. She could hear their murmurs, some impressed, some shocked, and a few who were just curious. But she didn't care. She wasn't looking for attention. She only wanted to get to the cafe, have her coffee, and enjoy a peaceful moment. Shadow stayed close, his body tense. She knew he was still in protective mode, scanning every sound and movement around them. His job wasn't just to guide her, it was to keep her safe. And he took that job very seriously. A few minutes later, she reached the small cafe at the corner of the street. She had been coming here for years. The smell of fresh coffee and baked bread drifted through the air. She didn't need sight to know that the little bell above the door jingled every time someone entered. As she stepped inside, a familiar voice greeted her. Emily. Right on time, as always. It was Lucas, the cafe owner. He was an older man with a deep voice and a kind heart. She had known him since she first moved to the city. "Morning, Lucas," she said with a small smile. She heard the sound of a cup being set on the counter. "The usual." She nodded. "Yes, please." She walked to her favorite table, near the window. Not that she could see the view, but she liked the feeling of the sun streaming in. It was warm. Comforting. Shadow settled down beside her, his head resting on his paws but his ears still flicking at every sound. Lucas brought her coffee a moment later. "Here you go, kiddo." She chuckled. "You know I'm not a kid anymore. To me, you'll always be that stubborn girl who refused to let anyone help her carry her groceries up the stairs," he said with a laugh. She smiled, taking a sip of the warm coffee. "And I still don't need help." "I know," Lucas said. His voice turned a little more serious. "I heard what happened outside." Emily's fingers tightened slightly around her cup. "It's nothing." "Nothing?" "Word is, you and your dog took down a biker." She sighed. "He grabbed me." Shadow did what he was trained to do. Lucas was quiet for a moment. Then, he let out a long breath. "You know, I worry about you sometimes, kid." I can handle myself. I know you can. That's what worries me. Emily took another sip of her coffee. Lucas had always been like this, watching out for her like a father would. But she didn't need protection. She never had. Before she could say anything else, the door jingled again. She heard footsteps, heavy boots. 2 people. The sound of leather creaking as they moved. She didn't have to see them to know who they were. The bikers. Her body stayed relaxed, but inside, she was alert. Shadow shifted slightly, lifting his head. He knew too. The cafe had gone quiet. The men walked up to the counter. Lucas' voice was calm but firm. Can I help you? There was a pause. Then, one of them spoke. His voice was lower than before, not as cocky. Yeah, coffee. Lucas didn't move right away. That's it? Another pause. Then the second man spoke. And, to apologize. Emily tilted her head slightly. That was unexpected. The first man sighed. Look, lady, I don't know who you are, but we were out of line. Emily said nothing. We didn't know. The man hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. We just saw a blind woman and thought. You thought I was weak, she finished for him. Silence. Then, a quiet yet. Emily set her cup down. And now? The man exhaled. Now we know better. She could hear the honesty in his voice. It didn't mean she forgave them, but at least they had learned something. She reached down, scratching behind Shadow's ears. He relaxed a little, sensing the shift in the mood. Apology accepted, she said simply. The tension in the cafe eased. The men got their coffee and left without another word. Lucas let out a breath. That was different. Emily just smiled. People can change. Sometimes they just need a little help learning their lesson. Lucas chuckled. You and that dog of yours sure know how to teach. She sipped her coffee, enjoying the warmth. But deep down, she knew this wasn't the last time someone would underestimate her. And she was ready. She was always ready. Emily kept walking, her steps steady and sure. She had walked this path many times before. The sounds around her were familiar: the hum of cars, the footsteps of people passing by, the rustle of leaves in the wind. But now, there was something else. Something that didn't belong. She could hear them whispering. The snickers. The mocking. She knew they were talking about her. She wasn't surprised. It had happened before. People saw her white cane, saw Shadow guiding her, and thought she was weak. Helpless. An easy target. But they didn't know the truth. Emily just smiled. Because she knew something they didn't. She heard their boots against the pavement. There were 3 of them. No, maybe 4. They walked in a loose group, just behind her, their voices low but not low enough. Blind girl all alone. She can't even see us. Bet she'd be easy to scare. The laughter was sharp and mean. Shadow's ears twitched. His body stiffened slightly. He heard them too. He always did. Emily kept walking, but her senses sharpened. She listened closely. She paid attention. One of them moved closer. She could hear the change in his footsteps. The way his boots scuffed against the ground. The slight hesitation before he took another step. He was testing her. Seeing if she would notice. She didn't react. Not yet. She just kept walking. She knew where she was. Just a few more blocks and she would reach the cafe. Lucas would be there. There would be people inside. But she had a feeling she wouldn't make it that far without something happening first. She heard another whisper. You think she'd scream if we grabbed her bag? More laughter. Emily's fingers tightened slightly around her cane. She didn't stop. She didn't turn her head. But she was ready. They didn't know who she was. They didn't know what she could do. And they definitely didn't know about Shadow. She felt the shift in the air. The tension growing. Then, a hand reached for her. It was quick, but not quick enough. Before the fingers could grab her bag, before the man could even touch her, Shadow moved. A low growl rumbled through his chest, deep and full of warning. The sound cut through the laughter. The footsteps hesitated. Emily kept walking. She didn't need to see them to know what was happening. She could hear their breathing. Fast now. Uneasy. Shadow's growl deepened. His muscles tensed. He was waiting for her command. She didn't give it. Not yet. Instead, she just smiled. And kept walking. Because she knew something they didn't. This wasn't over. Not yet. But soon. And when the moment came, they would learn the truth. The hard way. Emily kept walking, feeling the shift in the air around her. She didn't need to see to know what was happening. She could hear it. She could feel it. The men behind her had hesitated, but they weren't gone. They were still there. Watching. Thinking. Shadow's growl had unsettled them, but not enough to send them running. Not yet. Emily knew how people like this worked. They saw someone they thought was weak, someone they thought couldn't fight back. And when they were in a group, they felt powerful. They felt bold. But she also knew something else. Cowards always hesitated before they acted. And in that hesitation, she had the advantage. Her grip on her cane was loose, natural. Her pace remained steady, her head facing forward as if she hadn't noticed them at all. But she noticed everything. The way their footsteps started again, a little slower now. The way one of them coughed, a nervous sound covered by a laugh. The way another mumbled something too low for her to hear. They were trying to decide what to do. She gave them no clue that she was listening. That she was waiting. Then. A soft shuffle. A shift in weight. She knew that sound. Someone was reaching for her again. And this time, they weren't just testing her. This time, they were going for real. But Emily was ready. Before the fingers could even brush against her bag, she stopped. Just stopped. So suddenly that the man reaching for her stumbled. The unexpected movement threw him off balance. And then, before he could react, before he could step back, Shadow moved. The growl that had been a warning before turned into something more. A snap. A sharp, clear movement as he lunged, not attacking, not yet, but close enough that the man jumped back, cursing loudly. Emily turned her head slightly, her voice calm. You should stop. The street was quiet for a moment. She could hear the man's breath. Fast now. The other ones had stopped too. She smiled. Shadow doesn't like it when people touch me. Another second of silence. Then a nervous laugh. Lady, we were just messing around. Emily tilted her head. No. You weren't. She wasn't angry. She wasn't scared. She was just waiting. For them to make a decision. Because she already knew how this was going to end. They could leave now. Walk away, pretend nothing had happened. Or they could stay. And learn their lesson the hard way. She could hear them shifting. One of them muttered something under his breath. Another one huffed, as if annoyed. Then. I think you should give us that bag. The voice was different this time. Deeper. A leader. Emily exhaled slowly. Shadow's ears flicked. There it was. She had given them a chance. They had made their choice. She tightened her grip on her cane. Last warning. The leader scoffed. Lady, you can't even see us. Emily's smile widened just slightly. But I can hear you. A pause. A small, uncertain pause. And then, they moved. Fast. But not fast enough. Because Emily had been waiting. She had been counting their steps, their spacing. She knew exactly where they were. And the moment they lunged, she moved too. Her cane swung up, not wildly, but with precision. It hit the leader's arm hard. He yelped, stumbling back. At the same time, Shadow sprang forward. The second man barely had time to react before Shadow's weight slammed into him, knocking him down. The third man cursed, scrambling backward. Emily turned her head slightly. She could hear the leader still there, still standing, breathing heavily. Trying to decide if he should fight back. She adjusted her grip on her cane. She could hear his fist clenching. His weight shifting. She didn't need eyes to know what was coming. And when he swung, she ducked. The fist flew right past where her face had been a second ago. And then she moved again. Quick. Smooth. Controlled. Her cane shot up, catching him just under the ribs. He let out a sharp gasp, stumbling back. She straightened. Leave. Her voice was calm. Steady. And this time, they listened. The leader cursed, backing away. The second man scrambled up from the ground. The third was already moving. They didn't argue. They didn't try again. They just ran. Emily exhaled. Shadow returned to her side, his body still tense, but his tail wagging just slightly. Good boy, she murmured, running her fingers through his fur. The street was quiet now. She adjusted her bag and kept walking, as if nothing had happened. Because, to her, nothing had. This was just another day. And she was always ready. Emily stood still. She could hear everything. The three men in front of her. Their heavy breathing. The nervous shuffling of feet. The slight creak of leather jackets. They weren't laughing anymore. Not after what had just happened. One of them was still on the ground, gasping, trying to get up. Shadow had knocked him down in one swift, powerful move. The other two were frozen, unsure of what to do next. Emily didn't move. She didn't need to. Shadow stood beside her, his body tense, his ears pointed forward. His deep brown eyes locked onto the men. He didn't growl this time. He didn't need to. His silence was enough of a warning. The leader of the group, she could tell he was the leader because he had been the loudest, the most confident before, took a step forward. He was trying to act tough, but she could hear the hesitation in his steps. The slight waver in his breath. What the hell, he muttered, looking down at his fallen friend. Then he looked back at Emily. What kind of dog is that? Emily smiled. A small, knowing smile. The kind of smile that made people nervous. The kind of smile that meant she knew something they didn't. She reached down and ran her fingers through Shadow's fur. He didn't move. His muscles were still tight, his body still ready. Then, she spoke. Meet Shadow, she said softly. He used to work with the Navy SEALs. Silence. Complete silence. The words hung in the air, heavy, sinking into their minds. One of the men sucked in a breath. No way. The leader swallowed hard. You're lying. Emily tilted her head slightly. Am I? They didn't answer. Because deep down, they knew she wasn't. Shadow wasn't an ordinary dog. That much was clear now. The way he moved. The way he attacked with precision. The way he stayed perfectly still, perfectly alert, waiting for her command. No normal guide dog acted like that. The man on the ground coughed, groaning as he tried to sit up. That thing nearly killed me. Emily sighed. If he wanted to kill you, you wouldn't be talking right now. Another wave of silence. The leader took a step back. This is crazy. Emily turned her head toward him. She couldn't see his expression, but she could hear everything she needed to. The uncertainty. The doubt. The fear. She took a step forward. Just one. Immediately, the men stiffened. They weren't the ones in control anymore. She was. She could feel it. You thought I was weak, she said calmly. You thought I was just a blind woman with a dog. No one answered. She took another slow step. But you didn't ask yourself something important. They stayed frozen. What kind of blind woman walks around the city alone? She let the question hang in the air. She wasn't just any blind woman. And Shadow wasn't just any dog. She could hear their breathing quicken. Their nervous shifting. They had finally realized it. They had messed with the wrong person. The leader let out a shaky laugh, trying to cover up his nerves. All right, lady. We get it. Do you? Emily asked. He hesitated. She could hear it in his voice. He wanted to say something else. Something rude. Something arrogant. But he didn't. Because he knew deep down, he knew if he pushed her any further, it wouldn't end well for him. Emily tilted her head. You can leave now. The leader clenched his jaw. His pride was wounded. He didn't like being told what to do. But he also didn't want to end up like his friend on the ground. Without another word, he turned around and walked away. The other two followed quickly. Emily didn't move. She listened. The sound of their boots against the pavement. The way their footsteps faded into the distance. They were gone. Only then did she let out a slow breath. She reached down, scratching behind Shadow's ears. Good boy. His tail wagged once, but he stayed alert, watching the street. Emily smiled. She knew this wouldn't be the last time someone underestimated her. People always judged what they didn't understand. But if they ever tried again, they would learn. Just like these men had. Because she wasn't just a blind woman. And Shadow wasn't just a guide dog. They were so much more. And now, at least 3 men in the city would never forget it. The street was quiet now. The men were gone. Their footsteps had faded into the distance. Emily stood still for a moment, listening. The air felt lighter. The danger was over. Shadow stayed by her side, his body relaxed but still alert. He always stayed alert. He was trained that way. Emily reached down and scratched his head. Good boy. His tail wagged slightly, but he didn't move. He was waiting, listening, just like she was. She took a slow breath, adjusting the strap of her bag. She knew people were watching. She could hear them. Whispering. Murmuring. Some had seen what happened. Some had only caught the end of it. She could hear someone shuffling closer. A voice spoke hesitantly. Are you okay? Emily turned her head slightly. It was a woman. She sounded young. Nervous. Emily smiled. I'm fine. There was a pause. Then the woman exhaled. That was amazing. Emily chuckled. It was just another day. A different voice spoke this time, deeper, a man's. That dog, he's incredible. Emily nodded, running her fingers through Shadow's fur. He is. Another voice chimed in, full of disbelief. Did you really say he used to be a Navy SEAL dog? Emily smirked. I did. Silence. Then, the murmur of voices again. Some people were in shock. Others were excited, impressed. A few still seemed confused. She could feel the change in the air. A few minutes ago, people had looked at her like she was weak. Helpless. A blind woman who needed protection. Now, they saw her differently. She turned, tapping her cane lightly against the sidewalk as she continued walking. She wasn't here to prove anything to anyone. She just wanted to go to the cafe, get her coffee, and enjoy the morning. Shadow trotted beside her, his movements smooth and steady. As she neared the cafe, she heard another set of familiar footsteps. Someone was hurrying toward her. Emily. She recognized the voice immediately. Lucas. He sounded worried. A moment later, he was in front of her. Kid, are you all right? I heard he paused. She could hear the way he sucked in a breath. People are talking. They said some guys tried to mess with you. Emily smiled. They did. Lucas let out a long sigh. And let me guess, they regret it now. She chuckled. Very much. Lucas muttered something under his breath. One of these days, someone's gonna learn to leave you alone. She shrugged. Maybe. Maybe not. Lucas shook his head. You want your usual coffee? Yes, please. She followed him inside, the bell above the door jingling as she stepped in. The cafe was warm, filled with the smell of fresh coffee and baked bread. The chatter of customers filled the air. She could feel people looking at her. She could hear the way their voices lowered when she walked past. Someone whispered, "That's her." Another voice added, "That's the lady with the dog." She didn't react. She didn't need to. She took her seat at her usual table, near the window. Not that she could see the view, but she liked the warmth of the sunlight against her skin. A moment later, Lucas set her coffee in front of her. It's on the house today, he said firmly. Emily smiled. You don't have to do that. I want to. His voice was gruff, but she could hear the warmth in it. She picked up the cup, feeling the warmth against her fingers. Lucas pulled out a chair and sat across from her. So, he said, crossing his arms. You gonna tell me what happened? Emily took a slow sip of her coffee before answering. A few guys thought I was an easy target. Lucas snorted. They thought wrong. She nodded. He was quiet for a moment, then sighed. I just don't get it, kid. Why do people always assume you can't handle yourself? Emily tilted her head. Because they only see what they want to see. Lucas hummed. And what do you think they see now? Emily smiled. Something different. He let out a chuckle. Yeah. I think so too. For a while, they just sat there. Drinking coffee. Enjoying the morning. But outside, the city kept moving. People kept whispering. Stories kept spreading. By the afternoon, nearly everyone in the neighborhood had heard about what happened. And by the evening, the bikers who had tried to mess with her had a new reputation, one they wouldn't like. No one feared them anymore. Instead, people laughed behind their backs. Because they had been taken down by a blind woman and her dog. Justice had been served. And Emily? She just kept walking. Because this was just another day. And she was always ready. The day moved on, but the city didn't forget what had happened. Word spread fast. Faster than Emily expected. By the time she finished her coffee and left the cafe, she could already hear it, people whispering as she passed, their voices filled with curiosity and something else. Respect. It was a new feeling. She wasn't used to it. She had spent so much of her life being overlooked, underestimated. People either pitied her or ignored her. But now, they saw her differently. She wasn't just the blind woman with the dog anymore. She was the blind woman with the Navy SEAL dog who took down 3 bikers. She walked through the streets like she always did. But today, something was different. People moved out of her way. Not because they thought she was fragile, but because they knew better than to mess with her. A few people even stopped to talk to her. That almost never happened before. A woman with a soft voice approached. "Excuse me, miss." Emily turned her head slightly. "Yes. I just wanted to say that what you did today was amazing." Emily smiled. "I didn't really do anything. Shadow did all the work." The woman chuckled. "Well, you handled it like a pro. I think those guys will think twice before bothering anyone again." Emily nodded. "I hope so." She kept walking, but the encounters didn't stop. An older man, maybe in his 60s, stopped her near the corner of the street. "Young lady," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You remind me of my daughter. She's in the army." Emily paused. "That's a big compliment." He nodded. "She always says that strength isn't just about what you can see. It's about what you do." Emily thought about that for a moment. Then she smiled. "She sounds like a smart woman." "She is," the man said. "And so are you." As she walked away, she could still hear the warmth in his voice. It was strange. She had lived in the city for years, but she had never felt seen before. Not like this. It wasn't about her blindness. It wasn't about people feeling sorry for her. It was about who she was. And for the first time in a long time, people were starting to understand that she wasn't someone to be pitied. She was someone to be respected. Meanwhile, things weren't looking so good for the bikers. After running off, they had tried to act like nothing had happened. They went back to their usual spots, trying to pretend they were still the tough guys in town. But it didn't work. People had seen everything. The story spread faster than they could stop it. And soon, everywhere they went, they heard it. Laughter. Whispers. Mocking voices. They were supposed to be scary. Tough. Now, they were a joke. People pointed at them in the streets. Kids laughed when they walked by. Even other bikers guys they used to hang around with started treating them differently. "Hey, aren't you the guys who got taken down by a blind lady? Man, even her dog was tougher than you." It was humiliating. But it didn't stop there. The leader of the bikers, his name was Jack, had bigger problems. Because his boss. He wasn't happy. Jack had been part of a gang for years. Not just any gang. A real one. The kind that didn't like weakness. And now, because of what happened, Jack looked weak. The gang didn't tolerate weakness. So, late that night, Jack got a phone call. A voice on the other end, deep and cold. "You're a liability now." Jack swallowed hard. It was a mistake. It won't happen again. A pause. Then. "No, it won't." The line went dead. Jack knew what that meant. He was out. Not just out of the gang. Out of everything. No protection. No power. He was nothing now. All because he had messed with the wrong person. The next day, Emily's quiet morning routine was interrupted. She had just finished breakfast when there was a knock at her door. Shadow was already standing at attention, ears alert, body tense. Emily frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone. She walked carefully to the door and opened it. A man's voice greeted her. Strong. Professional. "Miss Dawson." She recognized the tone immediately. "A cop?" "Yes. This is Detective Ray Carter with the local precinct. May we come in?" "We." Emily listened carefully. There were two sets of footsteps. One heavier, one lighter. Two officers. She stepped aside. "Come in." They entered, and she could hear them looking around, taking in her small but neat apartment. Shadow sat beside her, watching. Always watching. Carter cleared his throat. Miss Dawson, we wanted to speak with you about what happened yesterday. Emily smiled slightly. I'm sure you've already heard the whole story. The second officer, a woman, chuckled. Oh, we have. Everyone in the city has. Carter sighed. Look, I'll be honest with you. Those bikers. They've been causing trouble for months. We've been trying to build a case against them, but they've been slippery. Emily tilted her head. And now? Carter's voice was amused. Now? They're not so slippery anymore. They're practically handing us everything we need. Emily listened carefully. Why are you telling me this? Because, Carter said, his voice more serious now, you might have done more than just teach those guys a lesson. You might have helped us take down their entire operation. That caught her off guard. She had just been defending herself. She hadn't expected it to go this far. The second officer spoke. One of the bikers, Jack, he got kicked out of the gang last night. He's desperate. And desperate people talk. Emily frowned. So he's giving you information. More than we ever thought we'd get, Carter said. Drugs, illegal deals, weapons. He's spilling everything just to save himself. Emily thought about that for a moment. So, she said finally, justice is being served. Carter chuckled. In more ways than one. She smiled. Good. The officers stood up. Carter looked at Shadow. That's one hell of a dog you've got. Emily reached down, patting Shadow's head. He's more than a dog. Carter nodded. Yeah. I can see that. Then they left. Emily closed the door behind them. She stood there for a long moment, listening to the quiet of her apartment. She had always believed in doing the right thing. She had always believed in standing up for herself. But this time, she had done more. This time, she had changed things. And maybe, just maybe, she had made the city a little safer. Shadow nuzzled against her hand. She smiled, scratching behind his ears. Come on, boy, she said softly. Let's go for a walk. And together, they stepped out into the world. No longer unseen. No longer underestimated. But respected. And that was justice. Emily walked down the familiar street, Shadow by her side. The sun was warm on her skin, and the breeze carried the scent of fresh coffee from the cafe. It was just another morning, but everything felt different now. People greeted her as she passed. Good morning, Emily. Hey, there's the strongest woman in town. That dog of yours is a real hero. She smiled at each voice. This was new. For so long, she had been invisible. People had either pitied her or ignored her. But now, they saw her. They respected her. Not because she was blind. Not because she had a guide dog. But because she had proven something important. Strength doesn't always look the way you expect. She heard footsteps rushing toward her. A little boy, probably no older than 10, stopped right in front of her. He was out of breath, but excited. Are you really the lady who scared off the bad guys? He asked, his voice filled with wonder. Emily chuckled. I didn't scare them. Shadow did. The boy looked down at the dog. He's so cool. Emily reached down, running her fingers through Shadow's fur. Yeah, he is. The boy hesitated. My big brother says people like you can't do anything alone. But I don't think that's true. Emily tilted her head slightly. And what do you think? The boy grinned. I think you can do anything. She smiled. You're a smart kid. The boy beamed, then ran off to tell his friends. Emily stood there for a moment, letting the words sink in. People had judged her all her life. They saw the white cane, the careful steps, the way she relied on Shadow. They thought they knew her story. But they never asked. They never wondered what she was capable of. Until now. She kept walking, letting the sounds of the city guide her. The rhythm of footsteps, the laughter of children, the steady hum of traffic, it was all part of her world. She had never needed sight to understand things. She had never needed anyone's approval to be strong. But now, people were learning. A woman nearby whispered, "She's amazing." A man added, "I'd want her on my side in a fight." Emily just smiled. Not because she wanted recognition. But because she knew that maybe, just maybe, she had changed something. Maybe people would think twice before judging someone by what they could see. Maybe they would start asking themselves a different question. Not what can she do? But what else might she be capable of? She reached the cafe and stepped inside. The bell above the door jingled. Lucas greeted her with a laugh. "You know, Emily, I've never seen this place so full before this early." She raised an eyebrow. "Busy morning." "Busy week," he corrected. "Ever since your little showdown with those bikers, people have been coming in just to get a glimpse of you." Emily shook her head with a smile. "I didn't do anything special." Lucas leaned against the counter. "That's not what they think." She took her usual seat. Shadow lay down beside her, resting his head on his paws. But Emily knew he was still alert. He was always alert. Lucas placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of her. "So," he said, "how does it feel?" Emily took a sip. "How does what feel?" "To be a hero." She chuckled. "I'm not a hero, Lucas." He crossed his arms. "Could have fooled me." She sighed. "I just did what needed to be done." Lucas nodded. "And that's exactly what makes you different." Emily ran her fingers along the rim of her coffee cup. "I don't think I'm different, Lucas. I think people just don't expect much from someone like me." Lucas tilted his head. "And why do you think that is?" She smiled. "Because they only look with their eyes." Lucas exhaled. "Well, they're looking a little harder now." She nodded. "Good. Because that was the real victory. It wasn't just about stopping some bad guys. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about changing how people saw strength. It was about teaching them to listen, to pay attention, to stop assuming. Because strength isn't always loud. It isn't always obvious. And it doesn't always look the way you expect." Emily had always known this. Now, the world was starting to learn, too. She sipped her coffee, feeling the warmth spread through her. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring. But whatever it was, she would be ready. She always was. And if anyone dared to underestimate her again, well, they'd learn the hard way. Just like everyone else had. Shadow lifted his head slightly, his ears twitching as if sensing something in the air. Emily chuckled, scratching behind his ear. "Don't worry, boy," she murmured. "We'll handle it." Because that's what they did. Every single time. And that was what real strength looked like.